everyone. So Glenn was a little bit naughty and went over, and I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so we'll try and go a little faster over this to get everyone to their sandwiches. All right, so can I just get a show of hands, who in the room has ever written something called a PRD, Product Requirements Document? Okay, how about anyone in the room who's ever written a user story? Maybe you're doing agile development, yeah, lots of agile development. Anyone ever written something called like a product spec, something along those lines? Yeah, okay, so the title of this is Purpose, not PRD. That's just for the alliteration. This is about product requirements and how we can all do a better job of them. So I want to start off by telling a story. This is a real story. It happened to a friend of mine at a company I will not be disclosing. And so she was working with a team that was trying to launch their online store. So e-commerce company, and it's before launch day. It's supposed to launch in a couple of days. She's playing around with it in the QA environment, and she realizes the cart is not adding properly. Okay, all the subtotals are not equaling the total. So she files a bug. She comes in the next day, and the bug has been closed. Not because it's been fixed, but because, hey, that wasn't in your requirements. Now, this is obviously an extreme example, but I would imagine that there's a lot of us in the room who've had this kind of argument. It was not in the requirements. Now, you can imagine what happened next. Okay? Big fight. Obviously, the product can't go out like this, but big fight about whose fault it is. And it kind of poisoned the relationship between this product manager and this developer. I know I tell this story for a couple of reasons, neither of which is that you should start putting this in your requirements. Okay? But the first point is, it is actually impossible to write down every requirement for what it is that you need to have built. And that's because each requirement that you have, it's really resting on a series of assumptions. This isn't a bug, this is a feature, okay? Because if you try and do every single possible requirement, you will turn into this guy. Now, can anyone tell me who this is? I'm going to give you a couple of hints. He's an ancient Greek. He's in the underworld, and he's climbing up a mountain. I heard someone say something. Sisyphus, yes, this is Sisyphus. I'm glad you guys are classics nerds like me. Sisyphus was very bad when he was alive, and as his punishment, the gods cursed him to carry this boulder to the top of a mountain forever because he would never actually be able to reach the top. And that is exactly what will happen to you if you try and document every single thing that's needed to make your product. You'll never actually get done documenting. The second reason why I tell this story is I think it's very helpful to think about why these two people are having this argument. And I believe that what's going on here is an example of misaligned incentives. Misaligned incentives is a concept from economics. It basically means that the way that you are evaluating or punishing somebody, what you're using to tell whether they're doing a good job, incentivizes them to behave in a way you don't actually want them to behave. So let's think about what success looks like for our typical product manager and our typical dev lead. All right, so for the product manager at a lot of companies, success here is going to be, hey, did you write really good requirements? Did you define a great product? And success for your developer might be, okay, did you build a really great product? Except this isn't actually what success looks like for most developers. They'll tell you that that's what it is, but the reality is for most development teams, success is, did I build the thing you handed to me on time with a minimum of bugs? And if you don't believe me that this is the real measure of success, I want you to think about, this is one of the rules, official rules of Scrum, which is, hey, once you start the sprint, you don't change the requirements. The explicit reason given for why this is a rule is it's going to jeopardize the team's ability to make good on their commitment, their date commitment. So if you really think about what this is saying, it's saying that hitting the date is more important than building the right thing. Now, that's not actually the worst thing that you could measure a developer against. I actually had a friend who worked at GE back in the day, and there, success for a developer was, how many lines of code did you write? The more lines of code, the more successful. And you can imagine exactly what happened to their code base with this as a rule. But the thing that you want to aim for is you want everybody, so the reason why you're getting these arguments, and by the way, I'm using Google Docs, which I generally advise, but doesn't let me preview the slides, so occasionally I may make a stumble like that. The reason why you get this argument over, is it a bug, is it a feature, is that it is possible for one member of the product dev collaboration to succeed while the other fails If it's a missed feature, then the product manager screwed up, but the developer did a great job, they delivered. And if it's a bug, the product manager was fine, but the developer screwed up. The reality is, it doesn't really matter because either way, the product isn't working and the company fails. So what you want to aim for is to have everybody pulling together, everybody to have the same end goal. And that end goal is, did our project meet its goals? You, the product manager, are no longer responsible for the requirements. What you are responsible for is making sure those goals are the right goals. This is the thing you ultimately own that nobody else owns. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be getting feedback on it, but that's what you own. And then the team as a whole, which includes you, is responsible for making sure the thing that you build, the requirements, make that goal happen. I want to stop for a short public service announcement. You are not a lone genius, okay? Even this guy was not a lone genius. He was actually a sociopath who took credit for other people's work, okay? The whole concept of the lone genius is a lie because teams consistently outperform individuals when you're talking about complex tasks, okay? And I'm not asking you to take my word for it. There is science to back me up. There have been many, many studies done. I'm just going to cite one, which is at the University of Urbana-Champaign, which for those of you who are European is actually a reasonably hard one to get into. They did a study with undergrads. They gave them these decoding problems, and either they worked on them individually or they worked on them in teams. And the teams consistently outperformed the individuals. In fact, the teams would outperform groups of individuals. I myself experienced something like this. I would recommend, if you're dubious about this statement that groups are smarter, go through this. So when I was in business school during orientation, we did this exercise, right? They gave us a scenario. Astronauts are trapped on the moon. And they gave us a list of items, and our job was to prioritize how useful would those items be for these trapped astronauts. Each person did it individually, came up with their list. Those went off to be scored. In the meantime, we were now put into groups, and the group would discuss, and again, come up with their own list. What is the best set of things for these astronauts to have? And there is not one individual who outscored their group. So now I want to talk a little bit about requirements. Give you some examples of what I'm talking about. So this is something that I'm working on right now. Very exciting project. I call it Tuna Sandwich. And I want everyone here to put yourself in the shoes for a second of a developer. So you probably went to university, possibly you have a master's degree, you're very good at your job, you're very smart. Your product manager just handed you this. So what kind of feedback might you have for them on these requirements? So one thing is you might tell them if something is impossible that they've asked you to do. You might get into one of these somewhat snarky arguments about whether something is a feature or a bug. But whether you actually ever say it to them or not, my guess is you're thinking this. Okay, so now I know a lot of you said you do user stories, so you're like, Jen, I would never write requirements like that. I know better than that. I'm going to write requirements like this. You can see here, because it's a user story, I did include who the user is. It's me, I'm hungry, I want a sandwich, okay? And I still have this helpful mock-up so that my execution team knows what I'm going for, all right? And with this kind of thing with the user story, you are gonna get a different caliber of feedback, right? So you might hear things like, oh, some clarifying questions, like, well, what exactly kind of tuna sandwich do you want? And the team is a little bit more empowered now. They're not just following a series of directions. So if they run into a problem, they're probably gonna go try and solve it. So this is for sure better. But this is not as good as it can be, okay? What you actually want to be doing here is you want to start with why. Why do we want a tuna sandwich? Because we're going hiking and everybody's going to be hungry tomorrow. And a proposal for what we should do to solve that problem, which is, well, let's go make some tuna sandwiches right now. If you approach things this way, where you make sure the team knows why you're trying to do something, and then you're soliciting their input on what's the best way to accomplish it, you're going to get a completely different kind of feedback. And by the way, my project is no longer called Tuna Sandwich. It's now called Feed the Hikers, right? So what I might hear now is something like, oh, hey, I don't think we should make the sandwiches right now, because tuna sandwiches get soggy if they sit around. So, like, why don't we make them tomorrow? Or you might even get the very important feedback of, tuna needs to be in the refrigerator, so it might not be the best choice for our hike. Congratulations, because you treated your developer like a fully formed adult, you have now prevented salmonella. So here is a real-world example I'm sure you'll be pleased to know I'm not sitting around writing requirements for tuna sandwiches. This is a developer I very much enjoyed working with, Stefan Heymans, very talented person. I'm going to continue to try and poach throughout my career. And so Stefan and I were working on this project at Netlfix. It was about creating profiles. This is the way that when people come in, if you don't have Netlfix, you can choose different profiles, and it'll remember your taste preferences and what you're watching and things like that. And so Stefan actually came quite late to a project. He took over from someone else. We were only a couple days finishing up of development work, and then we were supposed to go to QA. And Stefan grabbed me into a meeting and said, hey, Jen, I'm a little bit concerned. After somebody creates one of these profiles, I don't know that we're giving them feedback to let them know that that actually happened. I'm concerned that they'll think it didn't take and go through and try and do it again. Now, if Stefan's job was deliver your requirements on time, he's doing a terrible job now because he's actually suggesting that we should stay in development longer. But because he and I are trying to do the same thing, which is to make sure that the thing that we build actually accomplishes what we're trying to build, he's giving me great feedback. And we didn't have an argument about bug versus missed requirement. Obviously, it was a missed requirement. I didn't ask for that requirement. No one on the team did. But it was a save on the project. We spent an extra couple days to put in a little feedback message, and ultimately the product was more successful as a result. This is the kind of relationship you want to have with your development team. So as a broad framework, let me talk to you a little bit about what my approach is in working with my execution teams. So the first thing that I do, as soon as I've decided that an area is fruitful, there's a problem that I want to go solve, is I grab my designer. Now, I grab my designer because I tend to work on user-facing problems. If you're working on more back-end problems, you should probably be grabbing your engineer. You can grab your designer and your engineer, whatever small group you feel comfortable with. But the idea is, before I write down the first requirement, I want to talk through what the problem is I'm trying to solve with somebody else and work through it together. And what I'm looking for with my designer is we're going to talk a little bit about interaction. We're going to talk a little bit about information architecture, all that kind of great stuff. We're going to high-level sketch out what we think we should be doing in order to build something that will solve this problem. And then break. We're going to break. Okay, they're going to go off and they're going to create some mock-ups. Mock-ups, not red lines. Okay, the idea is to give an idea to everyone about what we're trying to do, not specifications of what to build. And I'm going to go off and I'm going to write what I call product spec, that you can call it whatever you want. I've used the Google Docs image here because Google Docs is the greatest thing that ever happened to product managers. Okay, it takes care of all your version control. You can always roll back easily. Everybody can access it from anywhere, and it has this wonderful feature in Docs specifically, which is comments. So people can just add little comments to the things that you or others have done to ask questions or weigh in if they can't be in a meeting, that kind of thing. I couldn't recommend it more. So in my product spec, and I have a couple of things. So first, I always lead with the background. Like, why did I even greenlight this project? What is the reason that I think this is valuable? Why do I think there's an opportunity here? And partly I include that because I legitimately want feedback from the team. If they don't think that there's an opportunity, I want to know before we go and spend a bunch of engineering resources. Then I talk about my goals. So what am I trying to accomplish? I do a lot of A/B testing. So this section is going to include my hypothesis. It's going to include my success metrics. How am I going to know whether my hypothesis is true or not? Even if you're not A/B testing, you should always be thinking about how will I know if my project succeeded. If anyone is coming to the shop talk, you can ask me why I know this, but only about a third of product ideas move metrics the way that they should. I'm going to include some high-level requirements, but it's really just meant to be a starting point. I always know that since I haven't talked to the execution team other than the designer yet, these are just a straw man. They are there to start conversation. They are not there to definitively say what's being built. And once I get the mock-ups in, I'm going to add those. I write this without the mock-up in front of me. And the reason that I can do that is the requirements, these high-level requirements in the mock-up, they're complementary. I'm not giving this like blow by blow of when you click here, this will happen and that will happen. The mock-up is going to communicate that. I'm talking about, well, like this mock-up, what is it trying to do? And then, one other thing. So I will tell you that when I first started as a product manager, I was working at a company where we definitely had waterfall approach, and I was writing PRDs. And I once wrote a PRD that was 176 pages. It was very definitive. Can anybody tell me how long do you think that I aim to have these product specs that I do the kickoff with? You can just shout it out. How long should it be? Yes. Aim for a page no more than 2 to 3, including mock-ups, okay? The document may eventually get longer as other people add to it, but for your kickoff, it should never be longer than this. And 2/3 of that you should be spending talking about the background and the goals. The actual product requirements should be just a teeny tiny part of it. Another important thing, and this is part of why I like Google Docs, is you want everybody to have edit rights on this. This is a living document that the team owns. The requirements section in particular is meant to be, we as a team think we need to build these things to accomplish these goals. And then the final step is, I'm going to have my kickoff. So I spend most of the time with my kickoff talking again about, why did we greenlight this? What are the project goals? And then we'll get into, okay, well, like, these are the requirements I'm thinking. Let's talk through them. I count something as a very effective meeting when the requirements we walked in with look fairly different, maybe totally different than the requirements we walked out with. If you walk out with literally the same set of requirements, then you need to go back to your team and spend more time talking about what the goals and the purpose is, because they didn't totally get it, and so they weren't able to give you feedback. Because the chances that you magically settled on the perfect requirements the first time out the door without even a discussion with your developer is basically 0. The beauty of this approach is, first of all, the project's goodness is no longer limited by my brain. I get the collective intelligence of the entire team. The second thing is, the team is going to be happier and having a better time, because solving this problem of, oh, we're trying to get to this goal over here, how do we do it, is much more interesting than just building something you've been told to build. And you will stop having this argument about whether it's a bug or a feature. It doesn't matter anymore whether it's a bug or a feature. The only question is, the product as it exists today, is it going to meet our goals? And if it doesn't, we need to keep working on it. It doesn't really matter why it doesn't. All of this together and collectively is going to lead us to more successful products. And I have successfully made good on my promise to let you out early. We have 8 minutes. Thanks very much.